Enemy mech destroyed. Primary objective successful. Proceed to dust-off zone for extraction. Sensors indicate friendly dropship has entered atmosphere. ETA dropship 1 minute. Shutdown sequence initiated.
The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the guests or hosts, and not necessarily those of the advertisers, networks, platforms, or stations. Warning that the content of the show may not be suitable for all audiences, and that viewer discretion is advised. The show does not intend to provide medical, legal, or financial advice, and viewers or listeners...
Welcome back, everybody, to Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio Live. We are broadcasting from 300 feet deep in an abandoned nuclear missile silo, lost somewhere deep in the nuclear wastelands of the Dakota Territories. And I am joined, as always, by the paranormal crime fighting duo Daisy and the Sundance Kid are in the silo tonight working security. And high above us, swarming in vast numbers, are Bat Squatch. They are radioactive and looking for human flesh. And beware. It has been a crazy week on the Great Space Roller Coaster. That's what I call this planet, and that's what it is. And there's, last week we had some technical difficulties, so we weren't on the air, but the past 2 weeks I've been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of research into as much detail as I can at Skinwalker Ranch. Brandon Fugel, the current owner of Skinwalker Ranch, was on not long ago with Ross Coulthart in a revealing hour-long interview, and we are going to jump down the Skinwalker Ranch rabbit hole tonight. Some of the things that he said during the interview were really enlightening, and one thing he said in particular really caught my attention and started me kind of theorizing about a new exotic paranormal theory, which is what we do at the PIA, is develop new, interesting, logical, however theoretical possibilities to fit all of the existing paranormal information coming at us on the worldwide information stream. And, another one occurred to me, and there's an interesting line of evidence, peripheral though it may be, anecdotal though it may be, it is interesting nonetheless. And theoretical though it may be, we're going to examine that idea tonight. The idea that, as Fugel put it, all roads lead back to Skinwalker Ranch. Interesting stuff. So we're right in the throes of a lot of activity going on around the planet. As I previously broadcasted and do so on an ongoing basis, our existing cyber prophecy as defined and divined, I guess, by the Webbot, combined with Vedic astrology, the Schumann resonance indicator, and premier remote viewing groups worldwide. We're in the cusp, in the throes of the great summer of revealing, and we're just getting warmed up. 16th of July, and July was a month that was predicted by the Webbot to be a very active month. It basically spit out that you could take all of the so-called pressure points that show up in mainstream media going way back 5-6 months, take all of that, double it, then turn it up another 50%, and you'll get the kind of activity it's predicting for July. That's a really active month. There's a lot of pressure points being pushed around the planet, and it's only going to get more interesting as the days go along here through the month and into August and even into the fall. As some of you may recall, part of the WebBot prediction in the summer of revealing, or summer of emergence is really the way that it describes it, is that there will be some kind of activity take place that draws the world's attentions to the oceans, and the idea that there is aliens living in the world's oceans. That's something yet to manifest, but we're going to keep an eye on it because, the WebBot it kind of predicts phases where these things will occur, and we're in that phase. So it's not like a specific day that it spits out or something like that. So it's going to be interesting going forward. Just to remind everybody, we did have a congressman from Tennessee, Tim Burchett, who said a few months ago on mainstream media that he had knowledge that the Navy was tracking an object over a mile wide in the oceans. I have to believe that that's going to be part of what ends up occurring to grab people's attention and say, hey, there might be aliens living in our oceans. And I have actually written a book all about the many different kinds of alien activity that have been recorded in the world's oceans, along with some very strange magnetic anomalies, etc., in my book, Alien Ocean. You can find that on Amazon, and I believe it'll be a subject that many people will turn to in the future. So just to remind everyone, as part of this overall, cyber prophecy that's sort of unfolding right now, this is all unfolding in a planetary periodically we go through this cycle. It's called the Kali Yuga, that goes way back into ancient knowledge and ancient mystery schools and their knowledge of how to actually measure mechanical movements in such a way that they can predict what types of cycles will take place here on this planet. We're sort of in an area where we have popped out of the cosmic debris that blocks us a good deal of the time from the galactic center, and we're being bombarded by cosmic rays every day. Some of you may feel that, some of you may not, but many people have been reporting that they're going through periods of like hyperactivity where they're getting massive amounts of things done in very short, what they would consider otherwise to be very short periods of time, followed by very strange periods of total tiredness, total lethargy, where you just basically crash for an hour or 2 hours. You get back up and you're like re-energized again, and you go through the cycle again and again. Many people are experiencing that, and that's part of this decoupling that we are said to be going through with our whole idea of what time is, how time operates, and how we measure time. All of that's about to change radically if we are to listen to WebBot predictions, and there will come a day within your lifetime. That's what's interesting. When there are actual devices that sort of are able to predict when an event is about to manifest in your event stream, otherwise known as your life, and you sort of time all of your efforts and energies around the manifestation of that event. it's a very different way of thinking about time and how time works. It's like it predicts that devices will be invented that detect so-called qualia. Qualia is, let's make it easy and call it unfolding probability. And as that unfolding probability begins to take shape and begins to merge into patterns, it can detect that. That's an easy way to describe the technology that's going to come out in the future as sci-fi world emerges, and it will emerge with the decoupling of secrecy from all of this recovered alien technology that we have recovered. And, you know, all of this ties together in tonight's subject. It's a very, well, exotic place we're going tonight with our discussion, because it sort of encompasses all of this and the idea that perhaps the Gnostics of ancient history were on to something when they talked about the so-called demiurge, and we'll be discussing what the demiurge is tonight. So that's part of our Skinwalker Ranch discussion, and I can guarantee you not many people have put the belief system of the Gnostics into a logical evidence stream leading its way all the way to Skinwalker Ranch. But that's what we are going to attempt to do in our theory. And I have some really very interesting news coming out of Paranormal in the News. And this is coming by way of the Paranormal Intelligence Agency itself, and all of the many sources that it monitors, and all the connections that we have, basically, is that, and this is not known widely at all, and not being reported by any mainstream source whatsoever, that an ancient Anunnaki tomb, get this, has been discovered and has been dug out in a small town in New Mexico. That should ring major alarm bells all over the place. We are in the age of Aquarius, the age where all secrets that were accrued in the last age of Pisces become revealed. And we have to remember that for every secret that is formed, the revelation of that secret causes a tiny little earthquake throughout humanity. And you're in a period of lots and lots of secrets being revealed and lots of earthquakes that are about to happen. I've been lucky enough to see the actual very, very extensive and detailed video evidence for this tomb, and all of the many, and by many I mean perhaps hundreds of artifacts that have now been recovered out of it. And I'm talking about just in the last few days, guys. That's fresh intel coming to the PIA, out to you as listeners of this radio show. So these artifacts are amazing. A lot of them seem to depict what we would describe as aliens. It would have taken, if all of these artifacts were manufactured by the same artist, let's say, it would have taken them hundreds of years to do it. So you're talking about a very elaborate tomb. It was inscribed with some very interesting inscriptions all along the entrance to the tomb. And just to remind everybody, the Anunnaki go all the way back to ancient Sumeria, and humanity's initial, some say initial interactions with a non-human intelligence that was somewhat human-like, and that they really genetically altered humankind. Homo sapiens sapien is believed to have been genetically altered, if we believe the ancient Sumerian tablets and their accounts of the Anunnaki. And It is said that they sort of ruled worldwide for a time, and this appears to be the tomb of one of these Anunnaki. Now, the Anunnaki were not immortal. They did have extremely long lifespans. We know that to be the case. But in my research, there are indications that there was a vast falling out in the Anunnaki hierarchy. This led one of the two brotherly princes that ruled this planet to get sort of cast out of the kingdom. And he was cast out with 200 of his followers. They landed on Mount Armon. And from there, they were literally sort of, well, you could say they were marooned forever on this planet. So they went against the High Council when they did a particular alteration of the human genetic pool. That was strictly limited. It was discovered. Inky, one of the two princes who actually was in charge of this occurring, was cast out with his followers. And today, there are various Anunnaki tombs around the world that are the tombs of these cast down Anunnaki that were marooned here on this planet after they went against the High Council. And this appears to have been, or is, one of those tombs. I believe the tomb of Inky himself to be in the south of France, and I have written an entire book about that, and that's called the Enoch Code, and that is also available on Amazon for those of you who like to deep dive into the subject matter. And so anyway, this tomb is very interesting. Hundreds of artifacts, extremely detailed artifacts. They have video evidence of the entire excavation of the tomb from beginning to end. There's no way in my mind that could have been or would have been hoaxed by somebody thinking that they were somehow going to cash in on it. They're not even really trying to get a lot of attention. The video evidence came to me by way of another extremely well-known, I won't say their name, but extremely well-known cryptozoologist and paranormal investigator and an accomplished treasure hunter, sort of all three. Amazing person, but interesting stuff. We'll have to kind of keep our eye on that and see if that makes its way into mainstream media. Wouldn't that be something? And tonight, in Cryptid Corner, I wanted to touch on, because it kind of touches on our main topic tonight, on the idea that cryptozoology, in a lot of ways and in a lot of cases, ends up sort of straddling the line between paranormal and what appears to be just zoological. And this very thing happened to me on a case I was undertaking with the late, great J.C. Johnson. And all these many years later, after the writing of the Skinwalkers at the Pentagon by Dr. Colm Kelleher, George Knapp, the journalist out of Las Vegas, it occurs to me that what happened on this particular case was, in fact, the so-called hitchhiker effect, and we just didn't know it at the time. I think that's fascinating, because this occurred way before they wrote about the hitchhiker effect and how they were studying it, and the Pentagon's OSAP, top secret, black budget OSAP program. And to remind everybody, the hitchhiker effect, in a nutshell, is the idea or the fact that all of these people that were involved at Skinwalker Ranch and then at the Pentagon's UAP/UFO study in its various forms, from ARROW or ATIP to now ARROW, and the OSAP program in between. All of them would study the UAP phenomenon in the daytime and go home at night to experience a wide array of what we would describe as completely unrelated types of paranormal phenomenon. In other words, these people will go home and there's poltergeist activity, there's cryptid animal activity, there's objects manifesting out of thin air and then bloop, going right back out of the matrix again. There's shadow entities walking across their rooms. There's disincarnate voices. There are light orbs that apparently emit an ionizing radiation that causes exotic forms of cancer. And we're going to get into that tonight because that's a big part of all of this, is the overall health effects that are now being studied by the Pentagon on human subjects who have experienced these very things. So the hitchhiker effect basically somehow attached itself to these people, went home with them, began to manifest itself in all these other kinds of paranormal activity, and then from there spread out like a virus. Began to affect their spouses, and then their children, and then their neighbors, and their neighbors' children, and their neighbors' children's friends, right? Like concentric circles, like a virus. In fact, some of them even called it the paranormal virus. So a prime example coming from my case files is the fact that J.C. Johnson and I were on a case, and when this is known, was known worldwide after its occurrence in our publication of the case, is the ultra-terrestrial case, where we went to investigate what appears to have been, and this was an area where there were lots of so-called Yaetso sightings. These are Bigfoot sightings in the Navajo Nation. This was on reservation land, way out in the middle of nowhere, with people that didn't have very many means, and who experienced an extremely distressing event whereby they were in the family's hogan. This is a traditional hut structure that's 8-sided. It has a mud and grass roof. Typically, these mud and grass roofs crack over time, allowing like sunlight will bleed through it even onto the floor sometimes, that kind of a thing. And at the same time, in the Navajo Nation, although every family has one of these traditional structures on their property, they also live in like nice trailers that are out on the property, right? But they were all assembled in the hogan one night. They hear gunfire way off in the distance that they describe as being machine gun fire. Lots and lots of it. They get really quiet, and all of a sudden everything starts rumbling. And then the rumbling turns into little rays of light bleeding through the cracked mud hut roof onto the floor. And this was in pitch black nighttime. So this really freaks them out. There's light bleeding all through the top of the roof onto the floor. The ground's rumbling. They hear all of this gunfire way off in the distance. And they come out of the mud hut hogan, look up, and there is a hovering spacecraft with gray aliens running all around the property. Immediate panic ensued. They ran into one of their trailers, barricaded themselves inside, and called the police department. They grabbed weapons that they had on scene. One of the family members, an uncle, who lived on the same property but in a separate trailer some 200 yards off, apparently ran into one of these gray aliens and strangled it to death. The couple that we interviewed described the sounds coming out of the creature as being truly horrific. These people were in shambles. It was a crazy case. The very next day, after us interviewing them, staking out the property overnight, we decided to take a trip out to the edge of the property to see where the machine gun fire may have been coming from. And way down a little side gravel road, we see a figure. And this is in the middle of reservation land out in nowhere, guys. We see a figure walking down the side of the road. And we get closer and closer, and I suddenly realize this is a girl. And she's wearing like one of those 1980s style like jean dresses. And I can tell that she's walking, not on the road, but just off the road, 3 or 4 feet. And you're talking about New Mexico scrub brush, cactus, thorns, all of that kind of stuff. We pull up to her, ask her if she needs help. Her head was down. She looked right up at us, opened her eyes. They were completely black. And she said, "I've got everything I need." And as soon as she did, a wave of energy hit all of us in the car, and we began to projectile vomit. We barely made it out of there, we feel like, with our lives. We look back, and that girl was following us down the road, and we actually had to call a Navajo holy man to come and bless us that night. J.C. Johnson never truly recovered from that episode. And we'll be back with our examination of Skinwalker Ranch right after our break.
I'm Sarah, and this is my story.
I'm Ellen, and this is my story.
One night, I was at a bar. I was having fun with my friends.
I
had one too many drinks.
I
got behind the wheel to go home.
I got a cab to go home.
All of a sudden, from out of nowhere, a squirrel ran across the road.
It
happened so quickly, I barely had time to react.
The cabbie barely had time to react.
I swerved.
The cab swerved.
I can't believe it. I hit a guy.
I cannot believe it. The cabbie just missed a guy.
I wish I took a cab.
Thank goodness I took a cab.
You have the choice to save a life. Don't drive buzzed. It's a decision you'll never regret. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. Brought to you by the Department of Transportation and the Ad Council.
Fly portals, slip through, time slip wide, slip through live radio, mystical airwaves, mystical. In the woods, shadows creep, monsters leave. In the woods, strange voices. Shadows creep in the woods, monsters leap. In the woods, bright noises. Mystical. Airwave mystical. Mystical. UFO. Alien overlord. From ancient times to modern days, legends of creatures in sudden disarray. Hear them speak through frequencies. Alien connections. Break it out, truth untold. Tune it in, cosmic mystery. Dark woods where legends breathe, paranormal whispers, can you believe? Bigfoot strikes through the veils, Dogman howls in the midnight tale. From the static, revelations pour, portals open, dimensions roar. Truth, no disguise. Cryptid shadows creeping near. Through the static, voices clear. Dark woods where legends breathe. Paranormal whispers, can you believe? It's the Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio. Wednesday nights, enjoy the show. It's how we spend our Wednesday nights. Yay, yay. It's crank that dial and dim the show. It's how we spend our Wednesday.
Welcome back, everybody, to Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio Live. I'm your host, Jack Carey, your tour guide to the Twilight Zone, and tonight's broadcast is brought to you by paranormal-experts.com. If you are out there in radio land, if you have been experiencing paranormal phenomenon, unexplained happenings, if you have seen UFOs, if you're a contactee, an abductee, if you need particular personal insight into ancient unsolved mysteries, then you can, in fact, book a consultation at paranormal-experts.com. There is a calendar on there. You click on that and you can book a 1-hour consultation with me, your host, Jack Carey, and I'd be happy to discuss your case with you. I've done it for 30 years now, and if I can't come up with some interesting possibilities and answers for you to help find out what's going on, I have a whole team of experts that I've been working with for decades, and I can guarantee you that we'll come up with information you probably haven't considered before. So take a look. It is paranormal-experts.com. And tonight we'll be talking about this whole idea. Brandon Fugel, the owner of Skinwalker Ranch, put into my mind when he said, all roads lead back to Skinwalker Ranch. And he made that statement after admitting that there were and have been and are ongoing high level, top secret, deep black budget discussions going on between Brandon Fugel and higher ups at the Pentagon. That really should tell us all everything we need to know about Skinwalker Ranch. This is a high priority, high level problem. And we have to remember that when we're examining this particular exotic rabbit hole, and it is exotic, I will admit, that there was a cross-contamination, if you will, that took place between the Pentagon and Skinwalker Ranch in the form of the personnel that they're both using for their programs. In other words, some of the key scientists, some of the key intelligence agents, and they don't talk about that a lot on the show or otherwise, but there are embedded, hardcore intelligent agents at Skinwalker Ranch at all times. Those guys, have experienced and seen things at Skinwalker Ranch, gone home to experience paranormal activity, but then they ended up becoming part of the overall Pentagon program to study UAPs. And there again, people in that program went home to experience the hitchhiker effect. So is it possible, like Fugel suggest, that all roads, all sources of the so-called hitchhiker effect can be traced back to the same thing, the same perhaps consciousness or entity that exists at Skinwalker Ranch? It's a very interesting possibility. One of the key figures in all of this is a man named Dr. Gary Nolan. And Dr. Gary Nolan is a fascinating individual. He not only is widely hailed among scholars, medical scholars around the world, as potentially being the best scientist on the planet, but he's also an expert in pathologies, and he's the guy that not only has tenure at Stanford Research Institute and elsewhere, but he is the guy that the government went to, the CIA went to study the bad health effects that were occurring in their personnel that were having interactions with UFOs. In other words, a large number of secret government personnel that have had interactions with UFOs have suffered severe, what Dr. Nolan calls profound, amounts of brain damage. It is the same kind of brain damage that shows up in the so-called Havana syndrome, which is caused by a device that was designed by Soviet intelligence. And yeah, I still call them the Soviets because that's what the Russians really are. They're still the Soviets. And they have utilized that device to fry the brains of many American intelligence personnel all around the world. It is a major problem. And so that same kind of brain damage is occurring in people involved in these deep black budget Pentagon programs studying UFOs. And they get Dr. Nolan to study it, right? Well, Dr. Nolan is a pretty wide open guy. If you follow all of this to the depth that I do, you'll know that Dr. Nolan has appeared on like 100 podcasts. He's completely open and honest about any and everything he can be that doesn't go against his non-disclosure agreement dealing with security, right? Well, he has openly admitted that as a child, he awoke a number of times to find little gray men in his room. In other words, Dr. Nolan is an abductee. When he was a little boy and first got his very first paper route, he was delivering papers in the wintertime when it's still dark outside, early in the morning, and he had to go through this little forested area to get from one side of the neighborhood to the other. And he was traveling down this little forested area, and he began to see his shadow in front of him. And he looks up, and this huge spacecraft with a light on it slowly floats overhead. These are all experiences that he remembers completely in complete detail, right? My question is, what are the odds then that somebody who the phenomenon has embraced in that way ends up not only becoming one of the, or if not the top scientist on the planet, but the go-to guy to then study the ill health effects being caused on humans by the alien craft? You see what I'm getting at? Is that not in and of itself a type of social engineering taking place right in front of our eyes? And how does that fit with this idea of the hitchhiker effect? Because Dr. Nolan has a witness that he talks about often. A person that was sitting in a car full of family members, and it was one of those station wagons with the see-through top. And the family has a UFO event. A craft hovers, approaches the car from way down the road, then slowly floats over the top of the car. As it does, it causes all kinds of apotheum effects, like the radio station changing and the time on the clock changing spontaneously, things like that. Well, everybody in the car saw a huge craft fly over, except for one of the witnesses. And what one of the witnesses reported wasn't seeing a large craft at all. It reported seeing a tiny little orb. In other words, Dr. Nolan suspects, as he states, that the true phenomenon was this tiny little orb, and it was projecting the image of this large craft flying over. And that kind of leads us into what I wanted to discuss as far as Skinwalker Ranch goes, right? This idea, is it possible that a Skinwalker Ranch existing within the substrata of the actual property itself, within the mesa, if you will, where they're drilling really as we speak, pulling up all kinds of weird magnetic rocks and metal and all kinds of stuff. But is it possible that an entity lives within the substrate of not only Skinwalker Ranch, but of the entire planet? An entity that the Gnostics once referred to as the so-called demiurge. And this is where I'll kind of explain really from a macro viewpoint this idea. The Gnostics, a religious group that lived in ancient history and who were eradicated by the Catholic Church. If you look up the Cathars and the Cathari and the Cathari massacre and all of that, you'll see what I'm talking about. But they held this belief that the earth was actually inhabited by a false god. And this false god was able to manipulate reality as we perceive it to be. Right? It's the idea that imprisoned within the planetary structure is this consciousness that can control or alter our perception of reality. What are we seeing at Skinwalker Ranch? Potentially an entity that is conscious, that can take many different forms, that can disguise itself even as an alien orb, or an alien craft, or an alien being, or potentially even a dogman. What if I told you that the highest ranking intelligence agent at Skinwalker Ranch had a run-in with an entity, a non-corporal energy of some kind on Skinwalker Ranch in the presence of other intelligence agents? They all felt it. They all felt the energy, and then an overwhelming fear just poured over them, right? Instantaneous as this was occurring. over 1,000 miles away in Langley, Virginia, not far outside of CIA headquarters, a housewife who is the wife of the intelligence agent, who, by the way, goes by the codename Axelrod, goes to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water at approximately 3 a.m. in the morning, the same time this is going on at Skinwalker Ranch. She doesn't know what her husband's going through or what he's experiencing. Nothing, right? She looks out the window, and directly across the property, standing right next to a tree and staring at her, is an upright, 8-foot-tall, canine-headed creature that the rest of us in paranormal land would call a dogman. Piercing, glowing eyes, staring right at her. She thinks she's going out of her mind. She goes back to bed petrified, but doesn't say anything. This was on a Wednesday night. The following Saturday morning, 2 teenagers that are Axelrod's kids are in the game room of the home. Mid-morning, 10 a.m., they notice movement at the window. They look over, and here is that dogman creature staring in at them. You would think the natural indication would be to run out of the room, but no, they ran towards the window because they were so shocked by what they were seeing. The creature bolted off, and as it bolted off, their testimony is that they saw leaves being kicked up underneath its feet. This was a creature that was in physical, corporal form during that period of time. What are the odds that he, Axelrod, experienced that energy entity on Skinwalker Ranch? And she experienced a dogman on their very property simultaneously and them not be connected. Impossible. Impossible. And my question is, was the energy being that they came across, was that the demiurge? Is it possible that within the crystalline structure of the earth, there exists a life form, an alien life form, a non-carbon based life form, imprisoned there, right? Who knows for how long, for eons of time, able to manifest wherever there's large quartz crystal deposits, using it like a conduit, like a roadway through the planet, able to pop up anywhere at once in any form at once, even perhaps disguising itself as an alien, non-human intelligence. But why would it do something like that? And that's where things really become exotic. Let's entertain the notion that that's true, that there is an entity. It's intelligent, it's conscious, and it's evil, and it's living within the substrata of our planet in the quartz crystal deposits. It's able to manifest at will in any form it wants to, in any paranormal activity within given geographic areas. That matches what we're seeing around the planet, strangely enough. And let's entertain the notion that this was an entity that was somehow imprisoned on this planet a very, very long time ago. Now look at things like what it did with Dr. Gary Nolan. Let's say that it was pretending to be the little gray men and all of that during Nolan's childhood, slowly developing him over time into a scientist that was going to do what? Help humanity overcome the ill health effects of a technology which will allow it interstellar travel. Could it be, as strange as it sounds, as exotic as it sounds, and these rabbit holes are like that, that what we're seeing is a alien intelligence that is somehow living within the quartz crystal substrata, imprisoned there, but is now and has for eons been slowly using this ability it has to sort of mold humanity into a star-traveling species for it to come along. In other words, has it for eons of time been developing us in order to escape this planet? Interesting theory. But what's really interesting, and a piece of evidence that I think is, to me, the most telling of all of the pieces of evidence ever collected at Skinwalker Ranch. And we have to remember that in any case, it always comes down to one single clue that really breaks the case, that really gives you insight into what's going on. Well, a little known fact is that, well, everybody knows Skinwalker Ranch is literally riddled with security cameras. They are everywhere, right? This includes their so-called computer lab. There are security cameras in that room, and they have them in every room and every structure on the ranch because paranormal activity occurs all over the place. A wide array of it, same kind, poltergeist type stuff, haunting type stuff, right? Well, one night, very late at night, the security cameras were rolling in that computer lab, and one of those computers begins to flicker. And it was turned off, but it begins to flicker. And the screen comes on, right? And slowly, two words begin to form onto the screen. And you look real close, and it gets real clear. And the message is, I live. Tell me that's not the ultimate clue at Skinwalker Ranch. That what we are dealing with is some sort of disincarnate alien intelligence. And I might add, this same disincarnate alien intelligence has seemingly been responsible for a number of cryptid animal encounters on that ranch, a number of UFO encounters on that ranch, a number of cattle mutilations on that ranch. The list goes on, and it all traces back to the same source. And that brings me to another very interesting point that Brandon Fugel laid on all of us, and that is the fact that they were recently investigating part of the ranch they don't normally go to, called Dry Gulch Creek, right? A number of times, wolf-like creatures have been reported on the ranch. In fact, one of them grabbed a calf, tried to drag it through the bars of its, holding area, and they shot it repeatedly with high-powered weapons, only to see it unaffected, trot off. They traced it into the forest, and the prints just stopped in mid-stride, like the thing vanished into thin air. Well, what if I told you not long ago they were down in that creek on the ranch, and they recovered a full, real, fleshy, maggot-ridden body of a wolf-like creature that has now been examined by an on-site biologist that is there at all times and who has access to a full dire wolf body that was recovered in the ice. And what if I told you that it was a spot-on match? A species that went extinct 135,000 years ago was just found at Skinwalker Ranch. The jaw structure is identical. They did DNA testing. Only 11% of it was identifiable. The rest of it came back completely unknown. That body is in their possession. It is completely inexplicable and goes against all laws of known science. When they asked wilderness experts, they told them there hadn't been a wolf in the Uinta Basin for 500 years. So on goes the saga of Skinwalker Ranch, and I ask this question. Is it possible that Skinwalker Ranch is the home of what the Gnostics called the Demiurge? Only time will tell. And next week, join us Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Central. We will examine another crazy, exotic, paranormal theory of some kind. I'll see you guys then.